Bon dia.
Good morning, everyone. We will get started on today's session.
Good morning, David McAllister. It's a pleasure to welcome you to CEDAW, a pleasure to have you here in our second edition of the summer course, Sofia Corradi, on the European Union. It's been a success. I was telling David McAllister a few minutes ago, and also people who are joining us for the roundtable after this first session, that the course is proving a success so far. We have over 600 people who registered, and most of them are following us online. Some others are present in the room, so we will have time for interaction, and as we've done in the previous 2 days, in the previous Wednesday and Thursday, in which we discussed first economic governance of the European Union, and then on Thursday technological and industrial aspects and the digital and the transition of the European Union. Today we are devoting our last day of the course to the perspectives for a geopolitical union. And as you know, all those who are here present and those who are following us, the idea is that we exchange both among and between experts, but also practitioners and politicians who are working on a daily basis on the topics of discussion of the course. So I will introduce the members of the roundtable later, but I'm very pleased that Gustav Lindström and Natividad Fernandez-Sola attended in person the course, and they are here. They will be joined by Paul Varghese, one of our researchers here at CEDAW, working on EU foreign policy. But first things first, and we will start with a discussion with, as I was saying, David McAllister, who's been a member of the European Parliament since 2014, as part of the European People's Party group at the European Parliament, but most importantly, he is currently the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament. And even most relevant, more than his position as chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, he was also the co-chair of the delegation of the European Parliament that visited Ukraine right before the start of the invasion of Russia. So he was present in the country, knowing at that point the fears of what was a looming preoccupation on the future of the country that unfortunately materialized since February the 24th with the full-scale invasion of Russia. So he is particularly well suited to not only reflect on the prospects for the geopolitical union, which is the topic of our session today, but also to brief us on the war in Ukraine, the implications for Europe, the implications for the European security architecture, but also for the global order that has been put to a severe test in the last almost 5 months since the invasion started. So we will proceed as in previous days. We will have a first keynote address by David McAllister, then we will follow up with a few questions from my side, and then I will open up to questions from the audience, both online and in person. So start thinking about those questions that you would like to address to Professor McAllister. It's a real pleasure again to have you here. It's an honor that you decided to come to Barcelona for this occasion, so the floor is all yours. Thank you very much.
Good morning. Dear Mr. Marias, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our exchange of views. I am indeed a member of the European Parliament from Germany, but as you can see, I have a British background. There are not too many McAllisters around in northern Germany, and I actually have one of the nicest positions the European Parliament can give to someone. I have the honor of chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee. I'm in particular happy to be in Barcelona, not only for this event today, where I would like to thank CEDAW and also the institutions of the European Union who are present in Spain's second largest city here in Barcelona, for inviting me and for organizing this. I also had the opportunity to visit the LNG terminal yesterday in Barcelona, together with the German Vice Consul, who I would like to also welcome. LNG are free letters, which in the moment every German politician gets very enthusiastic about. I'm not sure if every German politician would have been able to spell LNG 6 months ago, but things are changing, so we in Germany can learn a lot. That's why it was very important for me to visit the LNG terminal yesterday. I was in Ukraine end of January, beginning of February, with a small delegation of the European Parliament. We not only visited Kiev, we also went to Zaporizhia and to Mariupol. And it is, for me, like for so many other people, just heartbreaking to see what has happened in Ukraine, a great country with fantastic people, women and men. I'm very sure that your children and my grandchildren will learn at school later on in this century, when they're dealing with modern European history, that there will be a Europe before the 24th of February and afterwards. What has happened since the 24th of February has shaken all our convictions. We woke up in a different world on the 24th of February, and what we are seeing is a barbaric, unjustified, illegal war. It is an imperialist war which we thought would not happen again in the 21st century. One country invading another country without any reason and only with the idea to bring it into its sphere of influence and to suppress the people. What the Russian president, or I prefer to call him the Russian dictator, what the Russian dictator has achieved is that we have seen European unity and Western unity like we haven't seen for many, many years. We are united and mobilized to counter this barbaric attack in the areas of economy, security, energy, technology, and humanitarian support. The policy of the European Union, the policy of the West, and with the West I mean the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, other non-EU countries in Europe like Norway, but also our politically Western allies in the East, Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, is to put maximum pressure on the Russian Federation and to support in a maximum way Ukraine, in the end, of course, without becoming directly involved in this war. Until now, the European Union, together with our Western allies, has adopted 6 sanction packages in record time. These kind of restrictive measures have never been taken before against a third country. Especially the first 5 sanctions packages were adopted in record time and implemented. The 6th sanctions package, of course, took a few more days because we are getting into very detailed interests of certain member states. All our solidarity goes to Ukraine. The EU's focus is on supporting Ukraine financially, politically, militarily, as well as with humanitarian aid. And the brave women and men in Ukraine are not only defending their own country, their own liberty, their own territorial sovereignty and integrity, they are in the end defending our European values, because Ukraine stands for many things the Russian Federation under dictator Putin doesn't stand for: democracy, the rule of law, human rights, freedom of expression, media freedom. That's why Ukraine is also a threat to the Russian dictator and his criminal entourage in the Kremlin, because this is exactly what they fear most. If you look at the support the European Union, the 27 member states are given, it is remarkable in the depth and also the width. Just a few examples. We have never given military support as a European Union to a third country. Through the European Peace Facility, we have now provided 2 billion euros under this instrument, a unique clearance house to deliver military equipment to Ukraine that connects with member states offer for Ukraine, and we do this trying to avoid duplications. The European Union is tackling a dramatic refugee flow and is providing humanitarian aid to the people and macroeconomic support to the Ukrainian economy, which is seriously damaged and continue to be seriously damaged. And already today, we have to think about the time after the war. That is why the European Commission is working on a reconstruction plan for this country. You all followed that the European Council took a historic decision to grant candidate status to Ukraine and Moldova. For me, and this position is shared by many, many colleagues in the European Parliament across the political groups, a very important political signal of hope and solidarity. We have granted Ukraine and Moldova a European perspective, and we want to support these countries all this way because we believe that they are part of our European family. We have also decided that we are ready to grant European candidate status also to Georgia, but of course only in case the priorities specified in the Commission's opinion on Georgia's membership application will have been addressed. I will be traveling to Georgia next week with a delegation of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and we will discuss with the government, the ruling party, but also with the opposition, what they have to do in the next months to fulfill the requirements formulated by the European Council. So, back to Ukraine, one thing is clear: the European Union will continue to support Ukraine, and we will not stop working intensively on peace and security in Europe and beyond its borders. Like in my own home country in Germany, probably in many other countries, including Spain, a discussion has started, shouldn't this war come to an end? And I think it is rather bizarre that people who are sitting in Berlin, in Paris, in Brussels, wherever, on their sofas, perhaps with a glass of red wine in their hand, are discussing, shouldn't this war now come to an end? This war will come to an end, but it has to be under conditions which Ukraine is ready to accept. And that's why we are equipping with Ukraine to defend them, to support their defense against a totally unjustified invasion. And the conditions are very clear. The territorial sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine has to be respected. That means all military equipment and all Russian invasion soldiers will have to leave this country. Ukraine wants to be treated like any other country in Europe with respect and dignity. Now, I was asked to say a few comments about the geopolitical Europe. I would like to stress that the European Union is indeed poised to become a stronger geopolitical player. Or as Jean-Claude Juncker, the former Commission President, said, we want to learn to be weltpolitikfähig, which is a German word which means, translated, to achieve the capability of actually being a global player. We in the European Union, we are a global payer. We pay by far the most for development aid in the world. We're proud of that. But a global player is not the same as a global payer. You, as young people following international politics, are fully aware that the global order as a whole is challenged. We are seeing a shift, a geopolitical shift. New forces are emerging, questioning our ideas of multilateralism and the rule of law. This situation makes for strategic sovereignty, and as a German, I would prefer to use the term strategic sovereignty. If you had a French guest speaker, she or he might more be in favor of using the term strategic autonomy. But whatever we call it, and it's strategic sovereignty, it is a more significant goal for the EU, not only in the defense area, but also in economics, technology, and energy. We need to see the strategic sovereignty of a concept as a broad approach, not only focusing on security and defense. The Versailles Declaration, which the 27 heads of state and government adopted, in what I would call a strategic informal EU Council summit on the 10th and 11th of March, has laid out the fundamental building blocks of geopolitical Europe. Namely, they are, first, strengthening our defense capabilities, second, reducing our energy dependency, in particular on Russian fossil fuels, and third, building a more robust economic base. On the first point, and we will probably discuss this later on more in detail, towards a European defense union. I believe that the European Union and the Member States should seize this momentum and quickly take all necessary steps to ensure the strategic sovereignty of the EU and pursue a genuine security and defense policy in close cooperation with NATO. The 27 heads of government were clear that they stated in Versailles that they want to take more responsibility for the EU's security and defense and bolster our capabilities. And two important strategic documents have been adopted in recent weeks. We have the strategic compass on the one hand, the EU's, I would call it, roadmap, perhaps even white book towards a fully fledged defense union, and on the other hand, the updated new NATO strategy adopted in Madrid at the NATO summit on the 29th and 30th of June. And now that we have the strategic compass and the NATO strategy, we have to work on a third document, and that is the joint declaration of EU and NATO, because both organizations not only have a lot of member states who are in both organizations, and I very much welcome that with Sweden and Finland, two further EU countries are now joining NATO. They will be of real added value to NATO, strong democracies with military expertise strengthening the northeastern flank of NATO. That EU and NATO now sit down and come up with ideas, who does what, and how can we support each other. If I talk in favor of European defense and security policy, it's always about us in Europe remaining transatlantic and at the same time becoming more European. European defense and security policy should never be against NATO, should never be in competition with NATO, and it's certainly also not about duplicating existing NATO capabilities, because that doesn't bring any added value. It's about identifying certain fields. Where do we as an EU want to do more, where NATO isn't or where NATO might soon not be, and how can we in general strengthen the European pillar within the existing NATO framework. Josep Borrell, the Vice President, who I get on very well in our daily work in Europe, knows that I have called in public several times that I would call for a moratorium on any further strategic documents as regards security and defense. Everything has now been put down to paper. It's now about the implementation. Implementation is key. We in the European Union are well champions at writing excellent strategies. But on implementation, I think there's still some room for improvement. The important thing is, and that is the major difference between the strategic compass and Federica Mogherini's global strategy from the year 2016, the strategic compass has been endorsed by all 27 heads of state and government. It is also their document, and it is the member states who have to deliver. On energy dependence, you are all following the debate. We must make Europe independent from Russian fossil fuels as quickly as possible. The European Union has already decided to impose an embargo on coal beginning in August. At the end of this year, the adopted sanctions will ban 90% of our current oil imports from Russia. With this in mind, the European Commission put forth the Repower EU plan last May, which aims to cut the EU's dependency on Russian fuels by 2/3 until 2027. While the maintenance of Nord Stream 1 is ongoing until the 21st of July, and a lot of people in my home country are waiting for what will happen on the 22nd of July, The European Union needs to be prepared for the worst case, including arbitrary cut-offs. The next winter is coming soon. The next winter might be very tough. Additional safety mechanisms such as concluding outstanding solidarity agreements among member states are therefore urgently needed. And my final point is, in order to build a more robust economic base, the EU needs to re-examine and diversify its strategic supply chains. In a quest for ever greater efficiency, supply chains have become highly complex and globally interdependent. I am very much in favor of globalization, and I think we should do as much trade as possible with other parts of the world. But we have seen during COVID-19 and during the rising geopolitical tensions that some doubts have been cast on this model. Therefore, dependencies shouldn't be too big, because if they are too big, we become vulnerable. So developing partnerships with allies and like-minded partners is therefore key. To conclude, I've named 3 huge challenges in front of us: security and defense, energy, and strengthening our economic base, especially when it comes to the very strategic, crucial fields where we have become vulnerable. We as a European Union should strengthen our role as a global champion for multilateralism. It is about making the system more relevant, resilient, and effective. And that's why we in Europe, the EU 27, we need to intensify our relations with our strategic partners all over the globe. We are not on our own. We have many countries who have very similar ideas and share our values. The North Americans, the United States, and the Canadians, other non-EU countries like the United Kingdom or Norway. I've mentioned Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand. I am very much in favor that if we live in times of an increasing geopolitical Europe, and if we have a European Commission which itself is described as a geopolitical commission, we need to get our act together and also work on strengthening the international organizations, the United Nations. We should continue our cooperation with like-minded organizations like ASEAN, the African Union, or the Organization of Latin American Countries. NATO, I've already mentioned, as a key organization which is fundamental for our European security and defense architecture. And we should get more serious on trade. The European Union is a world power on trade, and in recent years we've perhaps lost some momentum in doing that what we can do best in Europe, negotiating excellent trade deals. In the last term we had the Canada and the Japan deals as the major achievements of European trade policy, CETA and NAFTA. By the way, I cannot understand that some member states still haven't ratified the Canadian agreement. I mean, Canada, you will hardly find a country outside the European Union which is so European as Canada. But in this term, we have to really make some progress. That means finalize the trade agreement with New Zealand, make progress on the trade agreement with Australia, finalize the trade agreements with Chile and Mexico, and perhaps after the presidential elections in Brazil, there might also be room for opportunity to get the trade deal with Mercosur done. I'll keep it there. Looking forward to the discussion. Once again, I'm addressing you as young people who will be the next generation of leaders in Europe. These are exceptional times, and that's why we need to show exceptional resolve, determination, and leadership if we want to preserve our fundamental values and our open and democratic way of life. I'm also saying this as a proud father of 2 daughters. I want my daughters, like all other young people in Europe, to also live in a Europe which is promoting democracy, the rule of law, human rights, the equality of women and men, and we want our European values, which are not European values, which are global values, to be applicable in many, many parts and countries of the world. In the moment, democracy is under enormous challenge because other powers have very other ideas of how we should organize our societies. And that's why it's so important that we go together, that we form alliances with other like-minded partners. That, I believe, will be the huge foreign policy task for the next 10, 15, 20 years for us in the European Union. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's been an absolute pleasure to listen to you, and also plenty of topics that you covered already in your initial intervention, and of utmost relevance, all of them. I'm sure there will be thousands of questions in the room, and I will only keep my role as introducer of the session to just one question that I would like to ask you, and then I will open it up to the audience, both online and here in the room. And of course, what your initial remarks make me think of is that the European Union tends to look at the world through a wide range of grays instead of a black and white relation with other global actors. And that is certainly the case with, in general, with the relations with Russia, but also with the relations with China. With Russia, of course, we've seen multiple connections throughout the recent years, ranging from energy issues to trade partnerships to even inclusion, politically speaking, of Russia to the global sphere, and also to the European Union and NATO relations. So we've had always a very difficult and conflictual relationship with Russia, but also a relationship based on the willingness to cooperate if that is possible. Things have changed, of course, very much after February 24th. The landscape is completely different, but this strategic approach to Russia is still very much present among many member states. And you referred to, of course, those who advocate for a peace settlement to happen at some point soon over Ukraine, because at the very end, relations with Russia, with our neighbor and our immediate neighbor in terms of territoriality, will still be there. I mean, Russia will still be there, will be an important actor for European security, and somehow, when the worst of the war in Ukraine has passed, then something will need to be thought. And the other camp that says, no, it is impossible to speak with Russia on a one-to-one basis, because Russia is basically changing the order we defend, it's changing the world we live in. It will be an aggressive power over other countries in the near future if we settle with Russia now over Ukraine, and that is indeed generating a discussion among member states that is a long recurring discussion. It's not something that has emerged after February 24th, it's something that has been among us. So we prefer, as Europeans, to keep both camps arguing all over and having this grey way of relating with Russia always present in our discussions. Same goes for China. We don't like to refer to China as the biggest rival the West will encounter for the years to come and for this century. We prefer to have this threefold relationship with China based on partnership, based on competition, based on rivalry. And that, of course, speaks of different visions over how important China is, or how dependent are we on China, how do we want to engage with China on a trade basis, on an economic basis, etc., but also on climate and many, many things. So again, from Europe, we see international relations with these powers, again on this not black and white, but rather more gray zone of relations. My question to you is, how can we keep with these gray-based relations over Russia and China, and thus how can we keep this nuanced approach to things if we are still taking decisions at the European Union on the basis of unanimity and on the basis of basically we have to agree among ourselves? Is this grey relationship does this great relationship go together with division all over time, or will we be able at some point, and what steps are necessary to reach that goal in terms of institutional steps and decision-taking steps, to actually be a global actor? Because while we speak about the geopolitical union, nothing has changed, really. I mean, a lot of context has changed, but nothing has changed internally. We still keep decisions the way we took decisions. We still have strategic difference among member states. We still have different visions on China and Russia among member states. So how is it possible that we will grow up one day, and will this growing up be coupled necessarily with changing the way we take decisions at the European Union level?
3 brief comments. First, on Russia. As long as the Russian dictator is in office, or anyone from his school of thought, I cannot imagine that we go back to any kind of normal relations with the Russian Federation. The Russian Federation, under this Kremlin regime, is highly aggressive, a dangerous, and the by far biggest security threat for us in Europe. And we still have some of these naive voices in Europe, which is remarkable, more in Western than in Eastern Europe. Those naive voices who say, oh well, it's just this one more war, and then the Russian dictator will calm down or whatever. First of all, read Mr. Putin's interviews, listen to his speeches. He has presented his vision. He's obviously following a totally bizarre concept of spheres of influence, which we knew from the 19th and 20th century. Everything which used to be part of the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, in his eyes, is his. He decides what happens here, and he wants to bring them back either under direct or indirect Russian influence. So we know exactly, if he succeeds in Ukraine, the next country on his menu will be poor little Moldova. And after Moldova, it will be Georgia. And he is already there, in Transnistria, in Moldova, in Abkhazia and South Ossetia. And afterwards, he will have a closer look at our NATO and EU allies and partners in the Baltics, Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia. We have to stop this man. And we can only stop this man in Ukraine. That's why I am convinced that we have to do more to support the Ukrainians in their heroic fight. It's a heroic fight. I used to be a German soldier. I was a Bundeswehr soldier. I am full of admiration for what the brave Ukrainians are fighting their lives against these barbaric Russian invaders. So that's the first point. But it will be a huge challenge for us indeed. How can we build up a new architecture in Europe after the Russian Federation has destroyed everything we have built up since 1945? I mean, the architecture we had even survived the coldest weeks and months of the Cold War. But how are we going to work with the OSCE, with the Council of Europe, with other institutions? Everything has been put into question. So I'm very pessimistic on Russia. And I must say that we should have listened more to people who were warning us. I mean, the 24th of February didn't come out of the blue. Second point on China. On China, I always take the line, the 3 verbs beginning with C should coin our EU strategy towards China, and Mr. Borrell has been tasked to update an EU-China strategy. Cooperate where possible, compete where needed, confront where necessary. China can be different things at the same time. A cooperation partner, for instance, on climate change. China is an important economic competitor. That is the main difference to Russia. Russia doesn't have much to sell us in Europe, apart from cheap energy. I mean, the rest of what Russia is producing is, well, who wants it? It's worthless. But China, we are an important economic market for Chinese goods. but that also gives us the economic power. The tool of sanctions against the Chinese economy can be much more effective, and the Chinese communist leadership knows that. So I'm for competition with China, economic competition, but it has to be free and fair, and we need a level playing field, and it doesn't exist. That's why under the German presidency, the push to try and get an investment agreement with China done, despite all the criticism, in general was the right approach, because for our small and medium-sized companies, and coming from Germany, I can tell you a lot of stories how the German Mittelstand is really at a huge disadvantage of the Chinese market. To get free and fair level playing field competitions is something we should work on. But it's not only about cooperation and competition, it's about confrontation. And we have to be fully aware of the fact that the Chinese communist leadership has totally different interests than we do, doesn't share the same values, and China is becoming an increasingly assertive, some even say aggressive, bully in the Indo-Pacific. And here also we have to form alliances with those countries who don't want to be bullied by China, like-minded democracies. I've named the countries. What we will also see, and whoever will be the next president in the White House, a Democrat or a Republican, one thing is clear: the Americans will focus more on the Indo-Pacific, and more lawmakers in Washington will say, look, I can't explain to my taxpayers in Idaho or South Carolina or Wisconsin that we are, on the one hand, increasing our military expenditures in the Indo-Pacific, and on the other hand, also still having all these troops in Europe at the eastern flank. I think there will be a call from the American side that they will say we will continue to be military present in Europe, but you Europeans will have to do more on the eastern flank. This call will definitely come, and that's why we better start getting serious. And on how the European Union can become more effective, I would say we have gone quite a long way. If you look 20 years ago, I mean, most of you were not on the world then, but those elderly people who are already following the media, I mean, 20 years ago, European foreign policy didn't exist. And since the Treaty of Lisbon, we have created the European External Action Service, we have the High Representative, Vice President, we have started to create a European Union which has entered the global scene, trying to become a global player. We're a good global player, but we're not always a good global player. But in the end, of course, the 27 member states have to agree. And I have witnessed, as a chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, Federica Mogherini and Josep Borrell chairing the Foreign Affairs Ministers' Councils in the informal settings of the Gymnich. 27 foreign ministers are not always easy to coordinate, because as long as you have the unanimity principle, one, and usually it's a man, one man always is in a position to veto or block the other 26. Unanimity, the European Parliament has been very clear here, should be replaced by qualified majority voting. But the problem is unanimity, to move into qualified majority voting, requires a unanimous decision. And I would say the big players are now in favor of qualified majority voting: Germany, France, Spain, Italy. But there are some member states who are very, very sensitive on this matter. Neutral countries like Malta or Ireland take a very reluctant position here. Then you have, no surprise, Hungary and Poland. But also, I'll give you a country which you perhaps wouldn't expect, Croatia. I think this also has to do with some Eastern European countries saying, well, we left the Warsaw Pact so that no longer Moscow can tell us what to do on foreign policy. This is part of our national sovereignty. Or the former Yugoslav Republic, Slovenia and Croatia, you will hear some voices saying, well, we left Yugoslavia because we didn't want Belgrade to tell us what to do. And here we are 20, 25 years later, running in danger that we perhaps be overruled by a qualified majority voting. So what's the solution? It's not the only problem we have. It's one of 100 things we should do better. But my solution is use the options of the passerelle clause to try to test if we could perhaps introduce qualified majority voting on sanctions, which I don't believe is a question of fundamental national sovereignty. Let's test it for 1 or 2 years. Perhaps it will work. And perhaps Budapest will then realize it is not the end of the world, that we step by step go to qualified majority voting. That might be a solution. But, Mr. Marias, if that was the only problem we had in European foreign policy, then we would have rather few problems. A final point. If we want to become a serious geopolitical actor, some member states need to know if 1 or 2 countries are blocking the further development of the other 24, 25, 26. At some stage, you might have a discussion where the others will say, then we will find other formats outside the institutional framework. And this, for me, as a convinced EU politician, is always only the second best option. I would always prefer the community method, but I don't know why I'm looking towards Budapest now, but at some stage, I think we have to be clear in our messaging. We want to progress on CFSP and CSDP.
Thank you very much. You've convinced me, so we're fine. Very good. Let me open it up already to questions. We have about a bit less than half an hour, so I'll ask all questions to be as brief as possible. I'll have to collect those online as well, and I will read them out loud if there are any. But here in the room first, because you attended the course in person, so you are entitled to have the first question. Who would like to break the ice and make a first question? Over here, and then, do you want me to collect a couple?
See.
Yeah.
Good morning. First of all, thank you for being here with us today. I just wanted to ask a question regarding, you talk about NATO and how we have to use NATO in our advantage, and then as a European Union, see which points we are weak and work on that. But also doing parallelism with what you said with dependency towards energy and other economic things. How can we use NATO and not become so dependent on it? How can we become strong and not become weak because of this dependency on NATO when it comes to defense matters?
So you mentioned about the dependencies on energy that we have in Europe, try to diversify. And one of the main options that we have discussed in Spain, of course, Algeria. I wanted to ask you, as a chairman, but also as a president of the parliament, what has been discussed in Europe about the current relationship of Spain and Algeria, knowing that Spain is mostly the open door for Algerian gas, and knowing that Algeria could be a strategic player, but current relationships are indeed far from perfect. So I wanted to know your opinion, if possible personally, but as well what has been discussed in the Parliament and in the Union. Thank you.
Good morning. It has been speculated, as you mentioned earlier, that Russia might cut us from the supply of natural gas as a retaliation for our support to Ukraine. And this will mean a hard winter both for our citizens and well for our economies. What steps is the EU taking towards this possible scenario in preparation for this cut-off of supply from natural gas?
No, cap allá. And then I'll go with you in the next round.
These are questions coming from the people who is watching the seminar online. The first question is, if to finish the war, do you think that the best option is to bet on sending weapons to Ukraine for its defense, or that it's possible to achieve peace through another more peaceful way? The second question is whether the EU has a strategy for the Northern African countries beyond the traditional national interests, or there's a a European global strategy on Africa, Northern Africa?
Okay. First of all, on NATO and EU. Most EU members are also NATO members, so it's not as if we are discussing two totally separate organizations. When Sweden and Finland will join, we will have 4 countries left in the EU who are not NATO members: Malta, Ireland, Austria, and Cyprus. So, but most big, main EU members are also in NATO. That's why EU and NATO summits usually take place one after the other, so people don't have to fly back and home, fly back, forth and home. On our EU activities on security and defense, and I'm very sure that Gustav Lindström from the EU ISS, who is dealing with these issues every day with his team, the most important thing is that our enhanced European strategic capabilities and structures must always be compatible and complementary with NATO. That is the most important point. And that's why we in the European Parliament, across party lines, are pushing for this next joint declaration of EU and NATO, and hopefully it can be concluded by the end of this year. We call, for instance, for the creation of the rapid deployment capacity. You might have followed that, the announcement that the EU wants to set up a standing multinational military unit composed of 5,000 women and men until 2025. Let's see how far we get, because we are, as I said, world champions in writing wonderful papers. But now it's about delivering. 2025, a lot of complicated questions need to be answered. Who's going to fund this deployment capacity? Command structures, control structures, and hopefully this force will actually provide added value in comparison to the EU battle groups. You might know that EU battle groups exist, or perhaps you may not, because they have never been actually deployed. So this is just one point of many, many concrete proposals of the strategic compass, but this is where the European Parliament will be very sharp and clear towards the member states. Stop talking, deliver. That's why we definitely need a moratorium on any further strategic compasses. That is the first point I wanted to make. Then on gas. Well, some countries are in a different position than others. Western European countries are not so heavily dependent on Russian gas supplies, and then we have countries like Germany or Austria who are, let's be blunt, in real trouble. What we urgently need to do is to diversify our gas supplies. Now, on the one hand, we have liberal, modern, open democracies who can deliver gas, like Norway or the Netherlands. On the other hand, the alternatives to Russia are not all members in the camp of super liberal, super modern, super human rights focused countries. The alternatives are Azerbaijan, Qatar, or the Socialist People's Republic of Algeria. Without putting all 3 countries in one box, I think we would agree that they are not, per se, natural like-minded partners in the alliance of democracies. But what can you do? You might have seen the pictures of the German Minister of Economy, Robert Habeck, going to Qatar, bowing in front of the emir. I mean, if somebody had predicted me that a year ago a German Green minister would go to the emir and tell him what for a wonderful chap he is and how happy he is to be in Qatar. But things are changing. What can you do? So we definitely need to diversify our gas supplies, and then we have to make choices. If you don't want Russian gas, well, you might have to buy others. But what we're also seeing in the moment, a lot of announcements, but we haven't seen any contracts. I mean, the one thing is that the German government is running around the whole world trying to buy gas. The other thing is that we perhaps actually get a few contracts done. And we're running out of time. This winter will be difficult. Another solution is, of course, LNG from the United States. We had an ideological debate about this matter for many, many years and decades. Yesterday at the LNG terminal here in Barcelona, they showed me the big map of all the LNG terminals in Europe. One country is without LNG terminals. Guess which one? Yes, my home country. I can only invite as many German politicians as possible to go to Barcelona, not to have a nice drink on the terrace, but to go to the LNG terminal. See what you have done here. Remarkable. Congratulations. Listen to the Spanish, listen to the Catalans. You can learn a lot. Then we have the ideological question of nuclear energy. We are facing one of the biggest challenges in post-war history. How are we going to get through the next winter? Especially if on the 22nd of July the Russian dictator might decide to stop delivering or delivering less. We have still 3 nuclear power plants in Germany who are supposed to be turned off by the end of this year. Could perhaps an option be, if we're facing this crucial winter, that for 1 or 2 years we prolong nuclear energy in Germany just for 1 or 2 years? I do not understand why the German government is taking such an ideological position on this question. I understand that the German decision has been taken that we are going to abandon nuclear energy. I was part of this decision when I was a Minister President of Niedersachsen. But in this existential threat for German industry and private households, we should use all options available. Then on Ukraine, what alternative do we have? We either let the Ukrainians in the end be slaughtered by the Russians, and we have seen in Bucha and Irpin what these barbaric soldiers are capable of, or we help them to defend their country. And how can we help them to defend their country? Give them the weapons they need. And you can see that weapon deliveries, especially from the United States, make a real difference. I would like to praise the American, the Canadian, the British contributions. I would like to praise the contributions of our smaller Eastern European partners. And I want to criticize that other countries who could do more are not doing more. And I think you all know which countries I mean. What's the alternative? If Russia wins this war, we will be facing really serious trouble. And by the way, in other parts of our European history, in the darkest hours of our European history, it was also countries giving weapons to others to help them defend themselves against a barbaric, aggressive invasion coming from the National Socialists in Germany. So sorry, I'm quite outspoken here, and perhaps it's also got to do that I've been to Ukraine several times and I got to know these great people. Forgot anything?
We can perhaps go to the second round then. Compliment. So there was one question there that was left from the previous round. Go ahead.
Okay, so it's not a secret that both the European Union and Russia should be interested in getting along economically due to the way they can benefit from each other. I understand that the European Union wants to ban Russia for this war, but this can also cause some problems to the European citizens. For instance, Hungary is determined not to ban Russia because its government don't want people to pay 3 times more for the gas. Nevertheless, other countries of the European Union prefer to suffocate their citizens by importing United States gas, which costs 3 times more. And, well, it's a country that is far from being a saint. It has bombed several countries like Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia, Pakistan, and so on. So is the United Union really looking for the European citizens' interest, or just want to please United States of America, becoming in some way its puppet?
Values versus interest, interesting. I'll collect a couple more if there are. Anyone? So here in the front, 1 and 2.
Okay, thanks. My question was about values and like European common values, and how can we, let's say, project those values even if we do not agree within ourselves in the values, for instance, in women's rights or in the LGBT community rights. So there is a sharp distinction between countries who defend the right to abortion, the right of women's body's autonomy, and other rights like that, and other countries who don't. And it has been a debate, I guess, in Europe with countries who want to incorporate, but with countries that are also part of the European Union now and do not agree with them. So how can the European Union tackle these paradoxes in rights? Thank you so much.
Hi, hello. Well, my question is in order to understand in the strategic compass is consider new threats like hybrid migration threats and around the borders from European Union. It's considered any point regarding this.
Thank you. Thank you first for everybody here to be here. My question is, we talk a lot about like European values, democracies, and I just want to ask about like with the new decisions like to integrate like Finland and Sweden and Finland in the NATO, and also how this is having a big effect also on the persecution of Kurdish people. I mean, like Turkey right now, like it's being like like it's being European Union has shown like its concerns and around like the Turkish government and its decisions, and so I want to know that like how is the European Union like working it out right now with like all of these decisions, Turkey having like a voice in the persecution of the Kurdish population? Thank you.
Okay, so on Turkey, the US values and immigration, plenty of aspects to refer to. We have about 10 minutes. I would suggest that we close it here so you have plenty of time to elaborate on any remaining issues that you'd like to address.
Okay, thank you. I'll begin with the United States. Despite some different opinions with the Americans, and we all know that the years 2017 to 2020, when the great philosopher was a president in the White House, we went through a difficult phase of transatlantic relations. Some say it was a low point. And I never would have thought that a US president would have questioned Article 5 obligations in NATO. I would have never thought that a US president would name the European Union a foe as he did. These were difficult times. But despite some major differences, I believe that there's no country outside Europe which is so important for us in the European Union than the United States. The United States guarantee our security and defense in Europe, and they will continue to do so in the short run and in the midterm. We, even if we wanted to, as Europeans, would not be able to provide security guarantees for our member states. We should be happy that we're in alliance with the Americans. We should be thankful for the Americans. And the American lawmakers, every year when they debate their budgets, have to take decisions why billions of dollars of US taxpayers' money is invested in Europe. What I never understood was that it was not way before the Trump administration. It started under the Obama administration or even under the Bush administration when the Americans said, look, hang on, we might have to discuss a bit more the questions of burden sharing. We are paying for security and defense in Europe, but you could pay and do more. But a number of member states reacted with such ignorance towards the 2% target which was jointly agreed in Wales in 2014. And I was following the debate in my country where serious politicians were saying, oh no, we Germans don't want to spend 2% on target, we don't want to be the puppies of Donald Trump. It has nothing to do with being a puppy of Donald Trump or any other US president, it's about fair burden sharing. And a lot of our countries have not delivered. That's why I welcome that Romania, Spain, Germany, others have now finally announced to spend more on defense. Now, I had Jens Stoltenberg in my Foreign Affairs Committee of the European Parliament 2 days ago, and Jens Stoltenberg, who's an experienced politician, he was a Prime Minister of Norway, he said, of course, increasing defense expenditure is not as popular as announcing more spending on other policy fields. I mean, if you're going to want to go in politics, if you want to get your voters enthusiastically cheering you, say that you want to spend more on education or on the environment or whatever. But in the moment we're in a situation that we are now having to face 20 years of underfunding of our militaries. And that's why we now have to invest these huge amounts of money. Because people are realizing, and I think your generation is perhaps further than the elder generation, there are people out there who don't like us. And they have very dangerous weapons. And if we want to counter them, if we want to deter them, we have to get our act together. That's why I believe that we seriously have to pay more for security and defense, and we can do that with the Americans, always as a partnership in leadership and responsibility. We need eye level with the Americans. That's why when I say, let's remain transatlantic and become more European, it also means that we Europeans together show more unity, and then we have the eye level with the Americans a bit more in the transatlantic alliance. I believe that with the launch of the Transatlantic Trade and Technology Council, we have established a new format where we might improve our trade cooperation. I very much regret that it was not possible for us in Europe to conclude a trade agreement with the Americans under the Obama administration. A lot of problems would have been less with President Trump if we had given them a legal framework. But of course, we Europeans were not ready at that time, and TTIP, as it stands, will never come back. But there might be something similar to TTIP which we could get done. Perhaps the launch of the Transatlantic Trade and Technology Council goes in the right direction. That was the first point. Then the second point on the Russians. I mean, we will always have to try and keep some kind of diplomatic channels with Russia. I mean, if in diplomacy you only want to talk to people who you really like and who are really like-minded, the list of countries will be very short. But Russia has shaken all our convictions, and we have to be extremely principled in dealing with the Russian Federation, and I don't know how in the short run any kind of trust and confidence can be built up again dealing with the Russian Federation, and certainly not as long as Russian soldiers are killing Ukrainian men and women every day and bombing schools and private households. Then on our European values, and that's why I don't like to use the term of human rights being European values. We believe in Europe that human rights should apply to every man and woman in the world. They are global values, and we would like to see one day as a final goal that they are applied in every part of the world. We're not there. We have a long, long way to go. In the moment, more people are not living in democracies than democracies. I have followed with great concern the latest statistics of some American think tanks that 10 years ago, the numbers of countries who were considered being fully fledged democracy has halved in 10 years. Democracy is under enormous pressure, under enormous threat. And you in Spain, like I in Germany, we can be very happy and glad that we live in fully fledged democracies. Billions of people have no chance, probably in their whole lifetime, to once express their views, what they think of their political leaders. That's why democracy support is an important element of European foreign policy. Climate diplomacy is something new. A few years ago, people were laughing. What is climate diplomacy? Is that any added value? I think we all are now seeing a situation where climate diplomacy will play a major role. As a German Christian Democrat, I would like to commend politicians from another party. Might be surprised, but I'm not involved in national politics. As much as I criticize my German government in parts, I would like to commend the good work of our new Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, from the Green Party. I think she's really opened the windows of the Foreign Office, some fresh air, which is good. New ideas. I think she has a fresh approach. And if Annalena Baerbock speaks about feminist diplomacy becoming a part of German foreign policy, we shouldn't ridicule this. But perhaps you should listen to people like Annalena Baerbock. What exactly is meant with feminist diplomacy? And what exactly is the new angle which perhaps men who have been running foreign policy for many decades have underestimated? I think that we should be open for new ideas. Not every new idea, I believe, will be in the end 100% convincing, but we at least have to seriously discuss these matters. So on democracy, on human rights, we want to form an alliance of those countries who share our values, and that's why Joe Biden deserves all his support for creating this alliance. When he invited the first round, I was a bit surprised about some of the countries. I mean, most of the countries I would tick the box, say, yeah, like-minded partner, but there were some countries on that list where I would say, wow, I didn't know they were a democracy and like-minded partners. We have to be careful. Where we have to pay more attention to is in the Indo-Pacific countries where I think we can do more in our cooperation. Let me name Indonesia, key country in the Indo-Pacific, and of course India. I mean, you can criticize India for a lot, but the main difference between India and China is India is a democracy. It's not always... I mean, but at least they are much more democratic than China. And that's why my first sympathy would always be with the Indians, because in India you can actually see change happening after elections, whereas in China it's always the same old bunch of communist ideologists, and we're all waiting for the 20th Communist Party conference to say what will happen in the next 5 years. Yes, and then I forgot to say on Morocco and Algeria, that's domestic Spanish politics. I'm not here to comment on the new approach in Madrid. You are well aware of the EU's relations with Morocco and Algeria, two important countries in our neighborhood, and we have to take our neighbors in the southern part of the Mediterranean as they are. And despite all the difference between Morocco and Algeria, these are two countries with structures we can deal with. Look at other countries in the southern neighborhood where there are no structures. Look at Libya, look at Syria, war-torn countries which are creating a lot of problems. So, no comment from me on Morocco and Algeria. You might want to invite Spanish politicians to discuss this.
Very good, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. It's been an absolute pleasure. So, thank you for being here. I know you have to run now. For the rest, we will break for approximately 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will be back with a roundtable where many of the questions that you have already raised can be again discussed later on. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
China, values, immigration, many of the topics that were EU-NATO relations, very long list of topics that were already covered in the first part. Now the idea, as you know, those who have been here for the previous 2 days and those who are following us online, the idea is to not only reflect on what has been said so far, but also to provide new perspectives to the discussion, elaborate a bit further on some of the topics that concern the perspectives for a geopolitical Europe. And we are very glad to have a very high-level panel discussion that will certainly be as interesting as the first session for sure. First with Gustav Lindström. Gustav Lindström is the director of the EU Institute for Security Studies, which is an agency of the European Union dedicated to foreign policy, to security, to defense issues at the European Union level, based in Paris, also with a strong presence in Brussels. But most interestingly, also an agency that gathers researchers from all over Europe. And that means that different researchers that come from different backgrounds and different areas of expertise form together a pool of researchers that jointly, at the European level and a European mindset, think about European foreign policy. And Gustav, as the director, also an expert very much on EU foreign policy, security and defense matters, will be able to elaborate certainly on this. He also co-chairs chairs the Council for the Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific and the EU Committee, so probably he will have also the occasion to refer to something that David McAllister referred to, which is relations with the Indo-Pacific and the importance of the region for the future of global politics. Second, we have Natividad Fernández Sola, who's a full professor of international law and international relations at the University of Zaragoza. Very much present in Spanish media and debate on the European Union foreign policy. Very much quoted author of my own PhD when I did my PhD in EU foreign policy matters. So she's a long-standing expert on these topics in Spain, and she'll be able also to elaborate on many of the things that have been said. So, muchas gracias, Natividad, por estar aquí. And finally, we have Paul Varghese, who's a research fellow here at CEDOP, working on different projects dealing with EU foreign policy, on an EU foreign policy perspective, particularly one that ended not so long ago on the areas of limited statehood and contested orders, and how does the EU act on its immediate neighborhood, both east and south, amidst a general geopolitical environment of contestation. So we are not, as Europeans at all, the only player in these neighboring regions, but also China, Russia, and of course the US have also their own foreign policies towards these regions. So how does the EU cope with that? That was EU LISTCO, and now particularly working on EU joint project, which is on enhancing the capabilities of the European Union as a foreign policy actor. So I'm sure he will be able to elaborate on this, and also on conflict prevention and peace building, which are his original fields of expertise. So I'm very glad to have this diverse panel, very glad to have this discussion with you, and I will give you a first round of introduction to all of you, starting with you, Gustav, on basically what it means for you, the EU as a geopolitical actor. Is it possible, is it feasible, or are we in a very difficult time for that objective to be achieved? So Gustav, the first floor is yours. Thank you.
All right, is it still morning? Yes, good morning, and thank you, Director Morillas, Paul, for the invitation. I also want to acknowledge the engagement that you have with the European Commission and with the European Parliament to do this summer course. And I have 3 points, and maybe what I'll do is I'll switch to Spanish, if that's okay. I have to say, it's a bit more difficult sometimes because they're very technical terms, so I might go back and forth. I heard some excellent English in the room, but we are in Spain right now, so vamos a intentar en español. La verdad.
So we're going to try in Spanish. Actually, to make only 3 points to talk a little bit about the European situation right now. The first point has to do with what Mr. McAllister said earlier, inside of Europe, the situation in Ukraine is right now critical. And so I see an internal force within the European Union which is positioned right now to do three things, which in English are
Reinforce. Y estos son documentos que han salido hace muy poco.
And these are elements that came out of the Commission very, very recently, on May 28th, if I remember correctly. And there is a need within the European Union right now of replenishing ammunition stock, because right now thousands of ammunition rounds are being used in Ukraine daily, and most of it came from countries in the European Union. And so the situation right now is that these ammunitions need to be replaced. At the same time, the second large challenge for us is that many countries need to change their ammunition from the old Soviet Russian ammunition system to ammunition that is more modern. So that's that replacement strategy.
Y últimamente, ahora también.
And finally, we're also talking about reinforce, which means that within the European Union, the member states need to reinforce their capacity to defend the airspace.
El espacio aéreo.
And so, and there's something that we need to do that is very practical on an operational level. The second point is that at the same time, when we know there's very practical things that we need to do, we also have a significant strategic challenge, which is referring to the strategic compass, as Mr. McAllister mentioned. And there are a lot of documents that are very critical and important, I would say, and that this compass is one of the most important things that we have, because it is charting the way for the European Union for the next 5 to 10 years. And what's most important is that this compass has goals within the document. And I have a question to throw at those of you who are here. How many of you were able to read about that strategic compass? Could you raise your hands, please? Okay, I see one hand raised. Anyone else? No. Well, if you find yourself sleepless one night, no, I'm joking. It's actually a quite accessible document, a bit long, about 50 pages. But what's interesting about it is that it has strategic goals within the document where one can see, are we doing this or not? What progress are we making towards this strategic goal? If you read the document, you'll find 81 strategic goals. Some of them say there's 58, 72. No, the official figure is 81. What's important about this is that of these 81 points, the goal is that 53 of them we need to make significant progress in throughout 2022, and we're already, this is July already. So there's been plenty of progress, and we can talk more about that afterwards. There's been the rapid deployment capacity, some toolboxes.
Instrumentos con herramientas, por ejemplo.
For instance, with FIMI, which is a new acronym for Foreign Information Manipulation Interventions, which is an element against hybrid threats, as well as elements for cyber diplomacy. So there's plenty to do, but there's also progress being made. And my last point, and I'll be very brief, also very important, the European Union and NATO, where we have, as Mr. McAllister said earlier, where we're seeing progress with this Strategic Council at NATO, and with the European Union Strategic Compass, the importance to have these two documents moving along without much duplication. And we are seeing that NATO wants to strengthen the Western Front, which has implications for the European Union, especially for this rapid deployment capacity, because Europe personnel is often a single set of forces, and there's also a debate of who does what. And that debate is going to be strengthened now, but we're also waiting on the third joint declaration, which will be issued in December. So there's still plenty to see, and I'm wrapping up with this. Thank you, Gustav, and thank you for these initial points. I'm sure we'll be going back to some of these matters, but I'll go straight to Natividad for a different vision that complements these matters. Natividad, please.
Today, and if I were polite, I should move my presentation from Spanish to English, but anyway, I prepared it in Spanish, so I will continue in Spanish. Gracias por la invitación y bueno, debo.
Thank you for the invitation. To start, I'm going to try and summarize because I speak quite a lot. Secondly, I have to say as well, to start, that I am pro-Europe, but not a complacent pro-Europe. So in this type of meeting, somebody has to play the devil's advocate, and we should not say constantly things that leave us comfortably seated on our chairs. So I'm going to try and give another point of view. I believe that we need to be critical. No state and no organization can be absolutely complacent with all of its actions. We are facing a Europe that's a geopolitical Europe. Okay, we're talking about a European Union. Is the European Union a geopolitical actor? It is not geopolitical. It is geopolitical, inherently geopolitical because of its position in Europe. In the continent, it has an incredible strategic importance and also an economic importance. But what does it mean to be a geopolitical actor? I am a bit worried about your subsequent questions. To be a geopolitical actor implies participating in international affairs, to be part of the game and to play your cards, to have the capacity to play your cards and to have the will to play your cards. So with regards to this point, I'm not really convinced. Now the answer, or maybe a key question would be, the common European security policy, does it have a geopolitical outlook? What it does, so Europe does it thinking this is my geopolitical position and these are my economic interests? Or is the EU only moved by ideological or axiological reasons, values? Or not even by that, just because of a story that generates consensus between 27 member states, which is not bad. And out of that story generating consensus, we can determine certain characters that could actually define the EU as a geopolitical actor, which does not necessarily mean that it is actually one. Because we also have to think that the EU has enormous internal differences. And when we think about any other geopolitical actor, we normally think about a state in which internal differences are buffered because there are no 27 sovereign states within a state. So we can find ourselves with internal differences that make the CESC's subjection to the majority, to a dependency for many different reasons. And the requirement to be a geopolitical actor would be to be able to contribute to that leadership, to be a leader and to contribute to international affairs. Is the EU an international leader? Rather than a leader, it has been a playfield. It has been a test pad, because it's a unique actor. But I have to say that we are, and when I say we, I mean the EU, we are the only actor that in the international scene can actually make great achievements if it agrees on defense, basically on defense. This is not me who says so. The European Parliament says so too. Well, I say so too. Because we have economic muscle. We have an enormous economic power. We have political power to a certain extent. We have technological power, although I do not know exactly what your conclusions were yesterday. We have soft power. I do believe we have soft power. people want to come to Europe. We do have soft power, but we do not have military power. When I say military power, I refer to in a wide standing. I mean, I'm not only talking about metal weapons. I talk about intelligence as well. And in order to have that power, we would need a common perception of our risks and threats, a commonly shared perception, a single way of facing these risks and threats. In other words, policies to face these threats and security, and to have the capacity in terms of resources from a wide point of view. Does the EU have it? Well, a geopolitical actor moves in order to have greater power. How can the EU be a geopolitical actor if it acts against its own interest? Well, you can say, well, it acts in favor of its values, and its values go against its interests. Well, we are probably the only actor in the world that, in order to defend some values, goes against its interests. And we're seeing this with the sanctions due to the Ukraine war, which to a certain point seems logical too, because there isn't a response to an international threat. But out of all of the actors who impose sanctions on Russia, the only one that is actually damaged is the EU. That also happened in the past when we sanctioned Iran or Iraq. That was absolutely justified because of these countries, two countries that are not a model for anything, but sanctions imposed by the USA and that the EU followed. The states were not affected by these sanctions against Iran and Iraq, but the EU was greatly affected. So if we do not act in favor of our own interests, we're running the risk of losing our main power, i.e. our economic and financial muscle. The data are available in any newspaper you may read. What's the impact of the Ukraine war? And I'm reading a Euronews document. The sanctions of the Ukraine war on Europe, a paralyzation of the recovery that was expected after the pandemic. And the newspapers do not need to say that. If you actually have to fill your tank, you'll notice it. A reduction of the GDP, a GDP that everyone believed it would be 4%, and it has been reduced to 2.6% in 2022. And for 2023, it was expected to be 2.8%, and it's going to be 2.3%. And you know that as the date comes closer, the forecasts are reduced or increased. A greater inflation, not only in the EU, but also in the Eurozone, which takes us from a 3.9 that was foreseen as 6.8% inflation rate, almost double. So this implies an increase or a price increase, and that price increase starts with energy prices, but also the lack of supply of raw materials. So under these circumstances, we have to think, are we the only international actor that imposes sanctions against its own interests? But precisely because we are an energy-dependent actor, should we ignore that? This on the one hand. Then the Ukraine crisis. The Ukraine war has implied a cutout or a big disruption in the supply chain, a discontinuity in the supply chain. And the main country affected has been Germany. And then the energy dependency on Russia's energy. And this forces us to look for other energy sources that are much more expensive. And if we do not want Russian energy because Russia is a non-good country, well, Venezuela, Qatar, and all of the other alternative choices are not much better, are they? So what are we doing in order to have an official evil to buy energy 3 times more expensive to some evil ones that for the time being have to be taken as good ones? Then we have the refugee crisis. And this is a humanitarian humanitarian action that we need to accept, and we accept it. We'll accept it more than when they came from Syria. We like Ukrainians better than Syrians. They have a temporary refugee status, which is the previous status before being exiles. But clearly, a lot of them will stay with the expenses that implies and the reconstruction of Ukraine. Who will do the reconstruction of Ukraine? The United States? Russia? Come on. And then for this reason, we need to increase, for this reason, because the United States has required us for a long time. We have to increase our defense expense. Given that we have a European territory at stake, as Mr. McAllister has said, we need to increase our defense expenses. We should have done this for a long time ago. Sure, if afterwards you want, we can talk about why we need to increase these defense expenses and how. All of this at a time in which the economic crisis is affecting us the most. I'm not going to refer now to the climate agenda or the climate change agenda. I'm not going to say anything about it, because if now, in order not to accept Russian energy, Germany first and the rest, we start burning coal again, where is our climate diplomacy left? So are we pro-climate or not? Are we democratic and who defends human rights, or are we a geopolitical actor? Everything at the same time seems to be impossible. And all of this at the same time implies that if we want to take it as the European Union is presenting it to us, it implies a significant transformation with a budgetary impact. Because all of the things I'm telling you, who will be paying for it? Will it be paid by the national government? At least the one we know best will not be paying anything, and you will say, well, this should be paid by Europe. Maybe others, but the one we know best will not pay almost anything. So if this is for Europe and the next generation funds end up for the war consequences, etc., etc., then maybe we will have to have an EU budget, or do we want to have business as usual? What we do as usual with our budget, that does not even reach 2%. With that European budget, do we want to do all of this? If we want to be a geopolitical actor, we need to take our own contradictions and say, okay, this is one contradiction. Do we prefer this or that? Because we cannot cover all fronts. So let me make a comment about the strategic compass. It's so funny to read. You will not fall asleep. It's supposedly the instrument that will give us a single voice, a global vision and some instruments. Fine. Let me summarize. A single voice. Well, a single voice defines the threats. Let me tell you one thing. The threats document has not been made public. We have the strategic compass, but we do not know what was the result of the threats document. Because my question is, the threats that appear in the strategic compass, are they shared threats, and then, yes, we could have a single voice? Or are they the sum of them all? Everybody has listed his or her threats, and then we have created a list. If it's the second one, the second choice, well, then we will not be able to have a single voice. Funnily enough, when you'll see it tonight, you will see that the EU does not speak on its own. The member states speak it. So if we want to be a geopolitical actor with a single voice, has there anything changed with regards to the previous situation? The strategic compass with regards to the Ukraine war, well, what it does is that in Europe right now is so much focused on seeing how to face the Russian Federation that has not attacked the EU, that we're forgetting about all of the rest. We are in the Mediterranean, we're in Spain, we remember the south. Our problem is down south. And when we have a problem with Morocco, will we call the EU to solve it to us, or maybe NATO, to come and solve all of our problems? Let's see if anything has changed, but what we have lost is a global vision. There isn't a global vision, and in that document, in the strategic compass, we do not face our own contradictions in our EU foreign affairs policy. We talk about the Ukraine war, and we say one thing for the Ukraine war, and then we say something altogether different in the European Union's position with regard to Kosovo, Palestine, or the West Sahara. And I am afraid I will disagree with Mr. McAllister, but the instruments of the strategic compass, basically, they do not give anything that's new. All of the things they mentioned already existed. There are some dates. I remember that in 1999, Spanish had a headline note of 60,000 men, which would be a quick deployment force. In 2003, 50 or 60,000. Now we reduce it to 5,000. I mean, to have a deadline is the same. All of the things that appear here had already been seen. And if you want, we can talk about the mutual defense clause as part of the strategic compass and other points that I have left to mention. But I do not want to take more time that had been allotted to me. So the strategic compass, it has been said it's a small step towards that geopolitical actor called the EU. But the political time is being accelerated around us, and the EU goes overly slowly. Thank you, Natividad. It's a recurrent discussion about to which extent we are able to identify these shared challenges and to act according to them, and to act with what Macaulay said, i.e. by implementing, not by inventing. By implementing the ones that already exist and the tools available to us. We could go back to Gustav, who has a clear vision and a very in-depth vision about the CRTP and the actions that have been carried out. But I'll leave it for the next round if you want. Paul, go ahead. Thank you, Paul. I had prepared my speech in English for you, but your generosity has actually made me very happy.
Of international peace building and the role of the European Union in it, which I would be more positive than Natividad. I think the fact that the EU is complex and it's full of contradictions is actually positive for contributing to the agenda of peace building internationally. So peace building started in 1992. It's a very recent phenomenon. It's a very recent idea. It was coined by Boutros Ghali, the Secretary General of the United Nations. But what was before, right? If it started only in 92, what was before? During the Cold War, this idea of international processes leading to the reconstitution of a peaceful society was called peacekeeping, and it was done mainly by the UN. The main tasks were about supervising truce, peace agreements, tasks of observation after war had ended, disarm armed groups, basically keep the peace. That's peacekeeping. And it was a task mainly made or guided by the military, by the UN troops. During the first 40 years of UN peacekeeping forces, a total of 13 missions were deployed. Israel and Palestine was the first, India, Pakistan, Lebanon, Congo, Yemen, Cyprus. From 1988 till, 5 years later, a total of 20 were deployed. In 1988, it started the golden decade of peacekeeping, and the Nobel Peace Prize was granted to the UN peacekeeping forces in 1988, until 2001, which was given to Kofi Annan. Why is it the golden decade? It's the golden decade because peacekeeping turned into peace building, and peace building is way more than just reducing to observation missions or policing tasks. It's about democratization. It's about peace building. It's about building a new state, consolidating state institutions, try to promote a vibrant civil society, and etc. Peace is not about keeping, peace building is not about keeping the peace, but about building a broader setting, consolidating the peace. What was the role of the EU in this period, in the 1990s? Not much. Member states participated in this, but not the EU as an entity. It was still constituted its foreign policy in the 1990s. Actually, the lack of capacity to respond to this crisis in this era is what triggered the development of EU's foreign policy, more particularly in the Balkans, the incapacity to just respond quickly to its neighborhood. The first civilian mission of the EU was in Bosnia. It was a civilian mission, mainly a police force, and the first military mission was in Macedonia in 2003, just after NATO. It was a transition from NATO to the EU. But the role of the European Union during this time, 1990s, and particularly in the 2000s, was greater. The EU was, as it was called, was a normative power capable of influencing global norms, influencing the democratization agendas. It's promoting economic trade, promoting interdependence between states towards international peace. And the EU in itself was a peace builder machine because it was capable of ruling by example. Its example was, out of the ashes of the Second World War, creating an entity which was capable of building peace between France and Germany and integrating, at the time, 24 states. However, the 2000s were problematic for the peace-building agenda. International intervention in post-conflict situations get mixed with a broader agenda of security, of military security. It was the context of the war on terror, in which peace was imposed from the outside or from the top down, and often served external interest. It was no longer considered neutral, it was no longer considered for the good of the state intervened upon, but it was, of course, mixed with more problematic agendas. The interventions in Afghanistan, but particularly or primarily in Iraq, did more harm than good to the framework of international peace building. Episodes of sexual abuse by UN troops in Haiti were detrimental to the image of peacemakers. So how was the EU trying to address this problem of not imposing the peace, of not mixing the agendas of democratization or development with broader agendas of pursuing the terrorists or demolishing the regimes? So the EU, while the EU was developing still its capacities in the 2000s, in 2009, after Lisbon, it tries to form its foreign policy and tries to generate its own idea of building peace. This idea consolidated with the global strategy and in the integrated approach to conflict and crisis. It's, just to summarize this idea, is the idea of bringing several instruments on the table in a post-conflict situation. It's an idea of conflict is no longer about two armed groups fighting each other, but it has several dimensions. It has the migration dimensions. It has an important economic component. It has to be about diplomacy at the high level, but also at the level of civil society, etc. So it's about bringing several instruments. The second contribution was that before it was very clear with peace building that peace building comes after violence has ended, but the EU tried to focus on conflict prevention, which is one of the feminist contributions to the debate, is about focusing on conflict prevention way before the conflict has started and way after it seems to have been settled, just to consolidate what it is peace in a conflict society. And a key idea for the European Union was as well the engagement with civil society, the engagement with the local level, promoting mediation as well as dialogue. The idea that captures this era of what it means to do peace building by the EU is the idea of doing less is more. Instead of trying to bring peace from the top, trying to do state building, you do less, facilitate, support, accompany in order to achieve better results. The UN has also advanced on their ideas, and they have pretty much advanced in parallel to these ideas of the EU. Now the UN since 2016 doesn't call it peace building, but sustaining peace, which is a bit similar to what the EU was trying to do with its integrated approach and broader agendas of building peace. Today there are 12 UN peacekeeping missions. The European Union has 18, 11 civilian, 7 military. Just to close it as a conclusion, the problem with this idea, to summarize it, of less is more, is that it does not really work in a world of geopolitics, or it works less, obviously, in a world of geopolitics and confrontations. So this idea, with the last with us, with Borrell and von der Leyen, with the idea of bringing on the table a geopolitical commission. This idea is accompanied by a broader approach to security and defense, which is, of course, more useful to keep or to confront a world in which con Natividad, el tiempo se está acelerando. You need
Time is accelerating.
be more proactive, more active. And then the contradictions emerged. Thank you.
Gracias, Paul.
Thank you, Paul. Well, thank you very much indeed. I think that we have truly covered, in this short period of time, the perception about the need for an update of the EU as a global actor, given the international challenges we face, and specifically Ukraine, but not only after Ukraine. This is something that you have all mentioned, which is where we felt more comfortable, i.e. the type of internal discussions in Europe that we used to have, either because we had a more important actor in the international scene under which we acted, under its umbrella cover, the USA, at some point, or because the world was going in a cooperative geopolitical direction, or a multilateralism effort, or in a rationale of going towards a perpetual peace in which we Europeans were the main characters, the main protagonists. All of this has changed extraordinarily, and since the 24th of February, it has changed even more so. But for a long, long time, we had been saying that the world was more complex, more contested, and connected. Yes, complex, connected, and contested. That was our strategy in 2016. And in 2016, we knew that we were going towards this more complex, more contested, and more connected world at the same time. So this made the EU, forced the EU to redimension its position compared to the traditional difficulty of the EU to act independently and to pursue its own interests, maybe because these interests are not well defined. There isn't the same perception about these interests, and with limited capacities, we do not have all of the capabilities that other international actors have. But of course, whilst history is being accelerated and geopolitical risks are being accelerated, and we're still discussing about our interests, our values, and our limited capabilities, and our decision-making system, the world is running ahead. And we are still having discussions that are highly decisive. Natividad talked about the battle groups and how decisive they have been in a scheme we have on top of the table for a number of years. We have our own capacity to do it, but we have never deployed them. But why? Because the political decision to deploy them has never been made. So this is still haunting us. It's our recurrent ghost haunting us. So the question for this second panel discussion, and afterwards I'll open the floor for Q&A. My question is this reality combined in any way? I mean, is there any thought or any current that allows us to combine these growing challenges, these growing geopolitical needs, this ever-changing world in which we live nowadays, as is being perceived by the main geopolitical actors in the world, against our recurrent internal discussions about what do we want to be when we grow up in terms of security and defense? Has anything changed in a determining way? And that could be the Ukraine war that has changed everything. I don't know. We have made unheard of decisions. We have used joint budgets to send weapons. We have started thinking about whether the reconstruction after the war should be based on European common funds. I mean, we have made decisions that are unprecedented and unheard of in our recent history. But these decisions, are they just a one-off issue and then we will go back to a recurrent discussion? Or have we really changed our mindset, our strategic mindset that the world has been demanding from us for a long, long time? Where are we in this discussion? Will we actually overcome successfully this discussion, or will we still be talking about European deficits in the next 5 years in the same way we have done so in the last 20 years? I don't know. Well, thank you. Well, I believe that we are in a critical part of the reflection. And if you'll allow me, I'm going to change into English, because I feel I have to send a strong message and with some very technical terms, if you'll allow me, okay?
I think that the EU has taken very significant steps to become a geopolitical actor, and it is not just because of what is happening now in the Ukraine, which is reinforcing this process, but I do believe that this is something that you can trace all the way back to 2003 with the European security strategy that started identifying some threats. You had an implementation report on that strategy in 2008. You had the EU global strategy that was a bit broader in June of 2016. You had specific implementation plans for security and defense that came out pretty much in November of that same year. And then, of course, you have now the strategic compass. And let me just be very clear about some of the things that are coming out of this compass. The threat analysis is indeed classified. I would say that that is something that has allowed a very open discussion among the member states. It's been a very positive process, and it is a very complete list of the threats. The problem is that being classified, it doesn't help any of us here. It would have been good if there was a declassified portion of it. There are some descriptions of what is in that report, but it is very general. So that's a bit of an issue. During the dialogue phase for the compass, the member states had over 50 meetings to discuss the content of the compass. You have not seen that before, that type of dialogue. A lot of that was online. There were discussions, and now there's movement forward on so many different issues. I'll just say a few and then I finish. Military mobility. We haven't spoken about that today. The ability to move equipment, personnel within Europe has been a challenge for a long, long time. Now we're doing big advances on this. There will be an update to the action plan in September, early September. We are moving forward ideas on coordinated maritime presences, so how to be more active in maritime areas. We have had pilot cases of this, but now we're expanding it to other areas perhaps. We have advanced our thinking on Article 44. Article 44 is that once the Council agrees on a certain activity, member states that are interested in moving forward can do so without others blocking it. So that's more flexibility. It could help the rapid deployment capacity. We have more debates on Article 42.7, which is how to understand when we can work in solidarity with each other. Includes more thinking on cyber threats, hybrid threats. We have more discussions on the threats themselves. There will be a review of the threats facing the EU this fall. So, and nobody has mentioned so far all the defense initiatives. So the capability development plan with the 11 key technologies that the EU needs. There are 38 subcategories. There are 139 technology building blocks supporting it. We haven't spoken about the coordinated annual review on defense, CARD, to allow member states to plan better, to share information on their doctrine and plans. We haven't spoken about PESCO and the 60 projects that we have, many of which are activities that we have had for many, many years. And we have not spoken about the EDF, the European Defence Fund, that provides incentives for member states to do things together. And as I mentioned before, the Commission, we haven't talked about DG DEFIS, looking at defense industry and space within the Commission. It's huge work. And on 18th May, this document from the Commission having an initiative for a joint procurement that will be funded by 500 million euros between 2022 and 2024. then giving room to a regulation after that that will allow for consortia. This is big stuff, and even on space. Next year we'll have a new strategy on security and defense in space coming out in the second semester, most likely the Spanish EU presidency. Lots of stuff happening. Sorry to say so many things, it's probably like, whoa. But I just need to make the point. There is a lot of things happening. Y por eso...
And that's why we need to say so. There are so many initiatives right now, and Ukraine is reinforcing all of that. And with that, I'm very sorry for such a long, for using so much time, but I wanted to highlight all of the things that are being done. One step forward, half step back, and 2 steps forward.
Muchas veces caemos.
It's important because oftentimes we fall into this macro analysis of the world, and we tend to forget that there's progress, there's steps forward being taken, and we need to put that on the table. So please don't excuse yourself. You're more than welcome in that sense to bring that, not just optimism, but more like realism on what's being done and what it has meant for the European Union. You know, this latest decision and how historic they are in historical terms. But that doesn't mean that they're enough. They're just, you know, historic in the sense that they happened. Obviously, we need more, but the European Union was not built in a day. And so it will remain. Natividad, you have something else to ask before we give the floor to questions? Yes, I do have. I didn't mention the battle groups. That was Mr. McAllister did it. And I have to say they haven't been used because Germany blocked them. When it came time to deploy them, Germany decided they would not activate them. And I think it's great to start a discussion with Gustav. I'd be more than happy to have one whole session about the strategic compass. And I'm sure we can have, you know, we can reach some common ground. But I just have 2 things to say. Article 44 of the treaty, which allows various member states to take on responsibilities, which to me was one of the great steps forwards in the European Union treaty that exists ever since the Lisbon Treaty exists. And it has never been enacted. What magic wand are we going to use to make sure it is used now? The fact that the United Kingdom isn't there, is that enough? Yes, it's great, but this is an instrument that we have since the Lisbon Treaty was enacted, and only mention of 42.7, which is the clause of collective legitimate defense relating to the NATO's 5th article, Article 5. Yes, that's in the strategic compass, true, but Article 42.7 is also on the treaty, and it has also been used once, summoned by France. And we did a weird thing there that we did in order to apply it. But what the strategic compass says is the European Union will keep investing in this. Please, what is this? What does that mean? That's nothing specific because we have, as has been said before, we have Ireland, we have Malta, Austria and Cyprus that are not NATO members. What happens in the event of an attack? Don't we all think how that this 42.7 article would be used as a clause of legitimate effect applied to the members of our member states that are not NATO members? But I mean, since we're doing these weird negotiations with Turkey, we can't really ask them that if Turkey invades Cyprus, the NATO should come and defend us. So what are we offering these countries? That's what I'm saying that is unspecific. Yes, we will be investing more in this. Well, as Gustav said, this is an example in solidarity. No. Solidarity is something different. This is a clause of collective legitimate defense. When someone attacks us, we will defend ourselves. Solidarity is what we do with Ukraine. We give you the old weapons we're not using, and then we'll replace them for new ones. That's not solidarity. That's collective defense. So to answer your question, 3 things. And I will try to be positive here, okay? Number 1, we either change now, but not just baby steps, but much larger steps. Or, I will repeat Javier Solana's works, but I think are hard to replace. Europe is moving towards international irrelevance. The bad thing is that he said this in Barcelona 8-10 years ago. And we are still with these wavering baby steps. Number 2, right now, Europe is facing a dilemma. We find ourselves in a competition among, you know, powers. And this leads us, the different states in the European Union, is everyone going to just save their own skin and do what's best for them. So we should be doing the same. The challenge is, are we doing this at the 27 level or a European Union level? Because doing it for 27 for the member states, each one their own, is the easy thing. And doing it collectively, jointly, is a challenge. And if the European Union does not overcome that challenge, the European Union is becoming irrelevant. I mean, Malta, Spain, Cyprus, and even Germany, if you will, is going to be rendered irrelevant. And number 3, I would just like you to answer one question. All these unheard of decisions that the European Union has taken, just for a moment think, if the United States had had a different position concerning Russia, would the European Union have adopted all these unheard of measures? And the first moment when I started to appreciate this strategic autonomy in the European Union was during Trump's presidency, because we said, okay, we're done. We have nothing to do but to start investing in our defense. The Trump presidency ends and we go back to our comfort zone as usual. So these are 3 decisions that need to be taken, and they need to be taken now. We cannot wait. And what Paul said is great. Oh, the peace missions, that's wonderful. But we also need to say that these peace missions that used to have the European Union, they were pretty much all executive, and now they're all non-executive missions. We train, we tell the little soldiers in Mali how they need to ask. They're non-executive, and that has nothing to do with the missions that we used to do in the Balkans, with thousands of men and women that we send to the area. So there are many missions, but we've downgraded them, you know, in their demands. So those are the 3 unappealable demands. We need to solve them today better than tomorrow. We have lowered the demands placed on these missions. We've done a less is more approach because we learn from the fact that if you want to do a lot, it sometimes doesn't work. And that's the idea of enabling and training and cooperating. And all these ideas with a difference in opinion in what the parliaments are doing in times of crisis, in times of emergency, that is a problem. And they're not different opinions, they're contradictions. And that's a very rightful vision. And just to go back to the question that Paul was asking the chairman in the previous session, he said, this war is going to end up eventually. What will we do with Russia then? What are we going to do in peace times? If we focus exclusively, and that's the point I'm trying to make, in this geopolitical Europe, where everything is an accelerated world, a world at war, which is great and it's very necessary, I'm not saying it isn't, but if we forget about everything else, about all the things we did well for many years, that's when, to me, the contradictions start, and which is why I value this control diplomacy, the focus on conflict prevention, all these initiatives and ideas which ultimately contribute to peace. And they're not in the papers, and oftentimes they don't look like they're enough, but they exist, and I think they have to continue existing when, in times of, you know, emergency, and when this acceleration ends. Because we have increased the mood has become heated, which is more than welcome. Even Natividad has joined the optimism bandwagon, which I think is great. So we'll be opening the floor to questions here in the room, and we'll get a few. I see 2 here, 2 there, 3, okay? Okay? Okay, great. Hi, good morning. My question is, keeping in mind the previous vision for Mr. McAllister on Russia as a common view, which I think is quite typical from the United States when they've had any, you know, interest. Isn't it their vision from a security, such a realistic security paradigm, what brought us to World War II? Don't you think that this approach is at least irresponsible if we keep in mind, you know, the present circumstances regarding the nuclear threat? Well, going off of my colleague said, we've really, you know, really raised our eyebrows after hearing this opinion on external affairs from classic political realism that is so aggressive. And obviously, from the European Union, where we have liberal democracies, we understand that our mission is more cooperation rather than conflict. And we ought to be looking for a cooperative position. So we would like to know what your opinion is, where you stand on what the attitude should be in the European Union concerning what is going on. Is that the road that we really need to be on, this very aggressive road, or should we soften the edges a little bit? I also like the question that Natividad has put on the table with regards to military expense, which should actually be talked about in Spain, where that money should be going. And then there's an academic debate that I think is very important in terms of the theory of democratic peace, whether this last conflict really changes the final conclusions or the final discussion, and what the results are that it might have in the current discussion in academia. I'm sure Paul would be happy to answer. Okay, yes, right next to, yes, and then we'll be going there and ask those other three questions. Yes, I think my first question, Gustav answered a little earlier, but the first day of the summer course, we mentioned that some of the main problems of the European Union are not so much capacity, but rather coordination and technical interoperability. And I wanted to know if these challenges are somehow being taken into account, and then if there's also taken into account a future European implication in the Indo-Pacific region. I'm assuming beyond the framework of the Atlantic Alliance, or who knows? Good morning. I'd like to ask the same question to Gustav and Natividad, because I think you've shown two sides to the European Union. One which quite seems to agree with the line that we are following, and another one that's rather skeptical and is looking for a radical change. We've been talking about the weight of the European Union, regulation, the importance of the economy, but there's something that hasn't been discussed, which is the military power. We have a country like Russia, which has the GDP of Spain, in front of a bloc like the European Union, whose GDP exceeds that of Russia by 7 or 8 times, and we're intimidated by Russia, which has intimidated other countries in the past. And can we actually exert political influence like the United States if we will really, if we can't deploy an army and make sure that our threats or influence be felt around the world? Is then that soft power worth anything if it never turns into hard power? Are we really being an influence, or are we just bluffing and waiting for everyone to believe it? So I'd like to hear both your positions and perspectives for the future. Thank you. Yes, and right behind, please. Good morning. I really like Natividad Fernandez's analysis, especially concerning the question she launched earlier to Mr. McAllister. So I wanted to focus my question on another matter that has also come up after hearing Natividad speak, and that is the role of the European Union in the defense of countries that are not part of NATO. Spain is part of NATO, but we need to highlight that the autonomous cities of Ceuta and Melilla are not covered by the Treaty of Defense of Spain. And we also need to highlight that NATO, over the past few years, is sort of like an organization of countries at the military service of the US. And we also need to highlight that Morocco, over the past few years, has also made it known to Spain that they're interested in grabbing Ceuta and Melilla, which they consider their own. So in that sense, the US seemed to support Morocco instead of Spain. And my question is, in the case of an invasion of Ceuta and Melilla, how would the European Union support Spain and defend Ceuta and Melilla? Thank you. Hello, my name is Pablo. Thank you very much for everything. I also wanted to thank Natividad publicly for her words, because I really loved what she said. I have 2 questions. Number 1, Rafael Puig de Feliu, in his book Understanding Putin's Russia, talks about the Paris letter, chapter, which is, I think, is like a great is being greatly forgotten because it sort of set the end for the Cold War, and no one remembers it. And he talked about it because he said that letter spoke about a concept of undivisible defense in Europe, which meant that no country in defense matters could do as they pleased. Everything had to be agreed on. And I think, and that's a feeling that I have, that in the European Union we talk about many technocratic matters, such as whether we need to have the same bullets or the same fuel or the same train tracks, but we never talk about the security concepts that we are to have, and I think it's a necessary discussion to have. Because, for instance, Zelensky, now that the process has opened, which is going to take 10 years, but for Ukraine to go into the European Union, Zelensky has said, well, we want to have a nuclear weapon. And I think the rest of the countries ought to have a voice in whether that happens or not. I don't want them to have them. I think it's more than enough that Germany and France have them. That said, that's my first question. The concept of indivisible security, whether that's being taken into account in the EU. Second question, what do you personally think about the military aid that the European countries are sending to Ukraine? And why do I ask? Because some people in the research center, which deals with matters of war and peace, they have a very critical attitude because they feel that Europe is only sending precious few weapons to Ukraine. Because if that's really what's happening, Russia's going to win the war. And if by what we're doing, they're going to win anyway, so then let's stop sending them weapons. And I also think that if Europe keeps sending weapons little by little, long term, it will not end well for us. There is no scenario where it will end well. Because if the war drags on and Ukraine enters the European Union, that reconstruction is going to need money. If Ukraine enters the European Union after the war, they will need help. But something else might happen, because if we're just offering them a half-assed help, they might enter a military alliance with the UK and the US. There's people saying that, and so that help will have been for nothing. And just to wrap up that second question, what do you think on this opinion that some people have, that Europe is just sending help, is sending weapons little by little? Okay, thank you. We have many questions, and they're all very important, many of them. And I think difficult to answer in definitive terms. But let's end the first round of questions here. And let's follow the same order, if that's all right with everyone. Natividad? Because some were addressed to you, and then we move along. Okay, yes, I will try to be very brief. So, pretty much all questions, which I really appreciate, I think they all have a common thread, which is, what are we doing? And so I do agree with some of the things that Mr. McAllister said, and I disagree with others, but the main one is that the war will not be won by Russia or Ukraine or Europe. No one's going to win this war. So we can keep feeding this war as long as we want and make it, chronify it or freeze it or whatever you want to call it, because no one's going to win it. And if there's someone who's going to win it, then it's definitely no one within European territory. This war could be won by China on the one hand, the United States on another one, but the Europeans, neither Eastern or Western, they're not going to win it. Since when has a war on European soil benefited Europeans? So we're not going to win here. Secondly, since there are so many questions, we'll just try to keep some order. The theory of democratic peace, how does that fit in here? How does that change? Okay, so the theory of democratic war, because I was asked this question in the previous panel, this happens because the Russian regime is not democratic. I'm asked, and my question is, had it been a fully democratic regime, this wouldn't have happened? Because Russia's interests are the same, democracy or no democracy. And this idea that until Putin leaves we won't be doing anything, then I'm sorry, but we could sit here forever. Whoever comes next, it's going to be exactly the same, because Russia's interests are permanent, opposite to us, because we really don't know what our interests are. Could you tell me where Trump's policy and Biden's policy differ? Well, The manners changed. Clearly, Trump's manners were different, but in essence, they're the same. We're very happy with everything that has been done at NATO. Look at this wonderful strategic concept. At the end of the day, all we have is these immediate meetings where we're going to have to determine who does what. And I have a question. Europe in the Indo-Pacific region, well, I'm sorry, but we've nothing to look for there except for a couple of member states that might have some interest. But I'm afraid that if we start dealing out competences like that, the logic is NATO, US, we will handle Indo-Pacific, which is what we have, this new alliances, AUKUS and whatnot. Well, no, not etc. It's just that. And you handle security in Europe and, with your neighbors in the East and West, which is why you're in Europe. And that would be the logical division of tasks. And if that is the logical division of tasks, those of us who are clapping to high heaven with this new strategic divide, they'd say, no, we don't want to be defended by Europe. But we can't do it. We can't have the United States defending Europe forever. And the theory of democratic peace is lovely. But even if it was a full democracy, and we could say they do have elections, they're just, the way they are, but things wouldn't have changed. It wouldn't have changed at all. And when this president leaves, and I'm assuming that will happen soon, we're gonna have another one. Even if now we get when the one that we really like leaves, the interests remain the same, because it was that president who had this proposal in 2018 of shared security across Europe, a pan-European project for security, without war or threats or anything. As soon as the White House saw the project, they really said, that project ought to be shelved. What about shared security for Europe? And this is where we are now. And what's our role in this? What are we going to do? All right, well, I understand that in Europe, even though we have military capacities, we are a bit reluctant to use them because of history or what have you. Do we need to use them? Well, sometimes we do if we want to defend our way of life, but we're reluctant to do so. So if we don't like to use them, and no one's going to be using them for us, I think they're necessary, but if no one is going to use them for us, then as geostrategic actors that we want to be, what we will have to do is try to avoid conflict. Because we don't want to use weapons. We're just not going to tell that to everyone, obviously. So we will try to avoid conflicts and not cause any. My personal opinion, and I know this is hugely unpopular, is that the conflict in Ukraine could have been avoided, but the European Union chose to be on the side of Washington and said, all right, let's go. So if you don't want to participate and you don't want to be using weapons, then we're just assuaging our conscience, saying, okay, we're just sending you some things to shoot with. But all we're doing is prolonging a war. And what we say here with a smile, these are lives, human lives we're talking about, and it looks like we don't care. We have values for, to talk over coffee with, but we need to send weapons to people so they can die more slowly, then we suddenly don't seem to care. Well, I don't think that's serious. We don't like military instruments, so we'll have to be great at conflict prevention and preventing conflicts with this position in the European Union, because what the European Union has lost radically is the possibility to act as a mediator. We can no longer act as mediators because we've become part and parcel of the conflict. And so that diplomatic decision of, being courteous and whatnot, we've lost that possibility. So what are we embarking on, if we haven't done so already? A new Cold War. Because we fell onto it. Just like that, because some people might have an interest in being into a new Cold War. Definitely not Europe. We're not interested. We know that already. Military expenditure, for what? Well, military expenditure needs to award us new, updated, current capacities, and Gustav knows about that much more than I do. That allow us to face current conflicts, because now we're seeing these multi-dominion wars that connect technological advancement with weapons, plus artificial intelligence. We don't have that. We need to spend money to get there. However, this insistence on 2%, and probably all of you have friends in the US, that insistence on 2% is to make us buy American weapons. So where are the projects for a European defense industry? What do we want that for? To sell weapons to Samoa? Well, that's supposed to be for our own use. So what investment are we going to make, and for what? I mean, You can imagine their faces. They would say, oh, no, but we're going to buy a European plane. But there are many countries in the European Union that said, no, we're buying America. So where does that leave the European Union? Why do we want an industrial policy? So basically, I think that this is what I wanted to answer. And this specific question on the situation in Spain, in NATO, whether the European Union would support Spain, and that's more national policies than European policies. So I don't know if this is the right place to talk about it. However, obviously, linking it with this matter of defense expense, obviously the defense budget needs to be to protect us from our own threats. We can't spend on defense to protect the Baltic countries, for instance. I mean, definitely if we do have an excess, obviously, but we need to go first. No European Union, no country in Europe or the European Union or NATO will not defend Spain if Spain isn't spending money to defend itself. And right now, Morocco's military capabilities far exceed the ones in Spain. Okay, so I also have some things to say about these points, but before I go, Gustav, do you have something to add? From my perspective, the war in Ukraine didn't start in February 24th, 2022. The war started in 2014 or even before that. And that's why my analysis, my personal analysis changes somewhat, and I'll repeat it. This is my personal analysis and does not reflect the views of the organizations where I work. But if we look at it this way, and we think about what happened in other countries around it, Georgia, or even further away in Syria, we need to ask ourselves the question, what happens if there comes a certain point when a clear signal is not given to the Russian President Putin, and you say, okay, well, we don't want any trouble, we don't want conflict, just, go ahead. The problem is, as Mr. McAllister said, if we look at things that way, we might think that we might see something happening in Moldova in the near future, or Georgia. And I think there's a large step to be taken before, talking about defending a country that's a NATO member. So that's when President Biden says we will defend every inch, every 2.54 centimeters. The message is, enter NATO territory and no excuses. And that's a clear signal of how important it is to wield this soft power and the hard power. You need to have both in order to have a strong geopolitical policy, to have all these instruments available. You need to have both. So from my side, I will say it's really important to pay a lot of attention to what's going on in Ukraine. And perhaps the last thing I'm going to say, because Paul might have a lot to do, but when we talk about weapons, and if it's worth it, sending weapons to Ukraine, because just by doing that, we're prolonging suffering. And to be honest, we don't know how this war is going to end. And I think many people thought this would be over fairly quickly. Putin probably thought he would be able to take Kiev, and he probably thought he'd be done by May 9 this year. And he was surprised by the capacity of defense in Ukraine and by the capacity of defense of President Zelensky. They're giving their lives for their country, and they will continue to do so. And when we now look at new systems which are entering the Ukrainian state, for instance, I don't know if you heard about this American system, the HIMARS, which is artillery that can travel about 50 miles, which is a defense that, a distance that exceeds that of Russian systems. So there's that system. Then the Caesar French system, which is also a highly mobile artillery system, long range. And Great Britain is also thinking about a system called LMRS, multi-rocket launch system, which is also really long range. So what we'll probably be seeing is that Ukraine will start to be able to have strategic advantage in the Donbas region, because they'll be able to deploy artillery at a longer range that the Russians can. So we will be seeing how that will change the war dynamics somewhat, and we'll see how that ends. But for that, I think this is a key point for Europe. And when we talk about security architecture, we cannot move forward until the conflict is over. And when it is over, that will have a great impact for this architecture. If Russia wins, it means that if you are wielding the hard power and want to change the shape of the European borders, then that system is what is working today. If the other side wins, then we go back to the notion that you can't do things this way around here. So we'll have to wait and see, and now we're having discussions on Helsinki, which was done in '75, the notion of an architecture for Europe. And so from '75 to 2025, Finland has already started discussing, the bringing back of these security concepts in Europe when we are getting close to the anniversary. So I'm going to stop here, and I'm sorry. Ceuta and Melilla is something I will not be going into. Maybe some other people are able to give a good answer to that. I will be offering some clues about that. Let me take the chance, Paul, because I think if you have something to say, we got a couple of online questions. Since we won't be having any more time, I'm going to leave it here. And they have a lot to do with what we said in the past. Shouldn't the European Union focus on being a different kind of power and not play by that same geopolitical logic, which is also a question that has been asked around in the beginning, and focus on matters that are more of a concern? Paul emphasized that in his first words. We talk about renewable energy matters and green power, but to that we add to what Paul said earlier: if through that distinct power they will turn into a more relevant actor rather than entering this geopolitical confrontation logic. But I will add them because these questions were asked online and I thought that they were worth answering. But Paul, please take it away. Yes, I have a couple of things to say. First, about democratic peace. One of the key elements of democratic peace and the assumptions is that if there's an interdependency, if I'm selling goods and you are going to buy them, then I don't want to start a war and destroy the people that owe me money. That's, the great advantage of liberal peace, which people thought could be achieved with Russia, with, the gas conduits, for instance, but we realized that wasn't the case. So this has, this was long coming with all the hybrid attacks. And what they were doing was destroying these connections or taking advantage of this connection between Russia and Europe to, instead of connecting, to destroy or destabilize. So we have seen a war period where this notion of interdependence or the liberal peace is not working. So, starting February 2022 with this bold-faced and brutal aggression, clearly the logical thing is for logical realism to really impose itself. And if Ukraine requests weapons, that they be given to them. And sanctions is something clearly that Europe, they want to defend themselves. They want to protect Ukraine from the aggression. What I would offer some nuance, and is the question that was asked the chairman in the previous session, is that he painted it in black and white terms. They said there is no other option but this one. And as an expert in conflict management and peace, I know there are other options that sort of fall in between, maybe not in between, but together with this decidedly military approach of contention. There are surely diplomatic alleyways or venues that we don't know, but we ought to have more, which is why I was surprised when the chairman said there is no diplomacy here. Or just to say something, that we are in talks with Russian oligarchs outside of Russia to see if they can convince them or to build alliances with external countries. So there are, or there should be, this kind of complements, because Europe is the soft power, and that's precisely the question that this member of the audience asked. And sometimes we don't really see that when it's just, when we just have this look on political realism and we forget this whole array of grays that the European Union was always fundamental, and that, you know, lately it seems a little less obvious.
Let me add something to this issue, because I believe that's really at the very heart of what we've been discussing. It is quite contradictory, the discourse of realism, and to find the rationale that Europe must be a political actor. That's actually contradictory with the very EU, because of the way it is, the way it projects its power. And this is a very relevant question, because indeed the EU has always been, and it has been proud of, being a different type of actor, a different type of actor in the international realm. An actor that wanted to attract rather than playing the league of imposition and how to actually implement power internationally. And we said so at the beginning of this session. Whilst the world understands less and less the rationale of convincing and cooperation in the international realm, and it understands the rationale of classical power. And this is a reality. This is so. And other international powers. And if you look at the resolution of the United Nations General Assembly, we can be very happy about the total number of countries that gave support to the European resolution. But if we look at the populations of these countries, the thing is very different. And where does the Global South position itself with regards to the discussion about the type of external policy that we have in the world? Then the picture is a very different one. So we need to be very cautious with the way in which, in my opinion, with how we consolidate, how certain strategic anchorages are consolidated because of what's going on in the world, and then how we adopt them as our own, because our rules are being questioned. I mean, for Europeans, what has always been natural, I mean, normative power, is not that natural anymore. It is not as accepted as being natural, which doesn't mean it's not desirable. Of course, I prefer to live in a liberal democracy than in a dictatorship or in an autocracy. Doubtlessly, to me, these values are much better than the others, and I will defend them. But in the eyes of other people, that's not the normality that will be real. And this is very important, because when you do foreign policy, you have to do so based on your own convictions and your own ways of understanding the world, but you must understand how the other receives those messages. And that has changed very much in the eyes of China, Russia, and many others, India, Turkey, and many international actors. So the foreign policy is not only what you do, but what the others perceive you do. And that normative condition about the EU is something that unbalances us. Because for a long time, either because of the US or because of ourselves, there was a clear equality between material power and ideal power. Those who had the material power, military, economic, commercial, trade power, had the capacity to dictate the rules of the game, and others wanted or should follow suit. That's the neighborhood policy. This is all of the things we've done for a long time. Now, that equality does not exist anymore. There is no equality between material power, because it's much more diffused, and normative power, because some actors say that the rules have to be rethought, revisited, and reformulated. But whilst this was happening, we found ourselves with facts, and the facts, as used to be said, as the British say, facts, what do? Well, I respond to the fact. And the facts are increasingly complex, so we need to adapt them. And we have adopted a narrative at the Geopolitical European Commission and by the very member state leaderships that does not fit well with the capacities we have. Because we have never been doing this. We have never built up a EU to be a geopolitical actor. So we have this double-fold problem, ever-changing rules and capabilities that are not enough, because we are dependent on other actors to have those capacities. And to me, that's a real problem, rather than the background discussion about whether Europe has to be a geopolitical actor or whether it could be a realistic actor or or another type of actor. To me, the real discussion is the first one. The other one is a conceptual one, which is also welcome, but is not necessarily as relevant. And that doesn't mean that to me it is very important. And here maybe I do not fully agree with what Natividad said. which is to call things by their name. In other words, if we are in the midst of a war in Europe, it's because there has been an invasion of Russia. And the possibility of understanding it as something within the international order, but in fact it's an alteration of all of the orders, and that implies many dilemmas. Do we arm or do we not arm? Do we contribute to that which the Ukrainians are asking us to do, i.e. defense? Let's talk about anything you want, but the first thing I need is to be able to defend myself from the aggression. Then we will talk about, you know, whatever. The summit of NATO, that was very clear. Thank you, Europeans, for the political support. Thank you for opening up the gates to enlarging the EU. They didn't say so, but in 20 years' time, thank you. But thank you, Americans. Thank you, British, because they are the ones who are helping us militarily. And this is an enormous crossroads, and we need to accept it as a dilemma. What does the EU do in front of this? Should it follow the road of what Ukrainians are asking us to do and what the US does and the UK does? I mean, we send weapons not as a promise but as delivery, effectively, or we adopt a different vision. That's highly political. That's highly political and highly complex to respond. Because on the one hand, we have the defense of the country that has been subject to aggression, and the other possibility is that this conflict enlarges or becomes eternal, and we're not contributing to security. But I haven't got an answer. Or maybe Gustav has an answer, and it would be wonderful if you shared it with me, because I do not know. Okay, please do answer me. Let me just remind ourselves that Europe has done quite a bit. This EPF, the EPF instrument, nobody thought that it would be used in the way it has been used. 2 billion euros, and maybe we'll have a fifth part that will take it to 2.5 billion. And this is money that goes to Ukraine. We have done a lot already. I said, well, the French system, Sweden on its own, it has sent many anti-tank munitions. When I see EU member states have been already very active. It's not that we're sitting on the fence. No, we have taken significant steps forward that a couple of years ago most people would have been very surprised to think that we could go in that direction. So I wouldn't like to minimize that, although we can say that more could be done. But the truth is that you have already done something. Well, this takes me to what I also wanted to mention. In spite of the fact that we're talking about the fact, what shall we do with Ukraine? How can we help Ukraine? What would be the best idea of helping Ukraine? There is a reality, and it's the fact that the EU today, the fracture with regards to Russia will be larger than what it was before the Ukrainian war. And we'll see member European countries who are EU member states whose main concern, it has been so for many years, but much more after Ukraine, will be the confrontation with Russia. And this is what I asked McAllister at the beginning. This will generate a big break, an internal break, although we have been very much united at the beginning, and suddenly it has been spectacular. Longer term, the division between those who see that the EU's goal and the NATO's goal is to confront Russia and stop its expansion, and stop its way of understanding international geopolitical. This is already part of our internal discussion. It is not something that countries outside of the EU think. It's part of the Baltic states and Poland, etc. And this is very much present in the EU. So this will make it even more difficult to respond to these longer-term questions. And we have to be aware that we're 27. It was not a problem that the UK was within the union or not. I mean, the breaks and the divisions go much beyond the UK, and in spite of the union in front of the wall, the next steps will reinforce that break. And sorry, because I said I would answer Ceuta and Melilla. It's all dependent on political will. We have known this forever. If we take some steps and not others, it's because there is a political will to do it. If we have created next generation EU, it's because there was a political will, and there wasn't so in the previous Euro crisis. If we have decided to do that, it's because it was political will. If we have sent weapons to Ukraine, it's because political will. And with Ceuta and Melilla, the same thing happens. Ceuta and Melilla, if they are not within the umbrella cover of the NATO, the original NATO treaty, because in principle they are not included in that which NATO has as a goal to do, i.e. to protect the countries in our hemisphere. Everybody knows, and that's what the conclusions of the last Madrid summit say, so that this is a political will issue. If there was an attack against Ceuta and Melilla, and this is considered to be an integral part of a member state, in spite of the fact that the original NATO treaty does not cover it, if there is a political will between the 32 members of NATO to defend Ceuta and Melilla, there will be a defense, because there is always a solution. There was a specific inclusion beyond the foundational treaty for the islands, for the Canary Islands, which are covered by the collective defense clause, article number 5. Not Ceuta and Melilla, but everybody knows that this, at the end of the day, would just be a political discussion issue. Like everything else in life, at the end of the day, politics are the ones deciding the direction you take. We are running over time. There has been a fantastic discussion with wonderful different points of view in this panel discussion. Allow me to thank the people who have attended in person this course, and you're all here. You have been present throughout the 3 days, and I'd like to thank all of the people who have followed us online. Many of you have registered for the second Sofia Corradi course. Of course, I want to thank the European Commission, the representative from the European Commission in Barcelona, Manuel Shapiro, who is with us here. His cooperation has been crucial in this course to turn it into reality. The Office of the European Parliament as well, for bringing us representatives from the European Parliament and to participate in the discussions and to create this course, which I believe is actually maturing in this second year, and I'm sure it will continue doing so in the third, fourth, and fifth years. So I'm very happy about the idea we had, which has been so warmly welcomed. But also allow me, in addition to thanking you for being here, allow me to thank the technicians who have been behind it all. I don't know whether you've realized it or not, but the whole electricity system fell down. The air conditioning was not working and the connection was difficult. Nobody realized it, which means that they did an excellent job from a technical point of view, in terms of broadcasting, interpretation, sound, etc. So this allows us not to realize it, which is wonderful because it means everything worked very well. I'd like to thank the technicians and, of course, the Commission teams, the Parliament teams, and specifically my own CDOP team, and specifically Cristina Serrano and Hector Sanchez, who have been behind all of this course for a long time. And they have made it possible to carry it out and to implement it very well. So thank you very much, everybody. I hope your desire to get to know better the EU has been satisfied, and if you so wish, we can see each other next year for a new third Sofia Corradi course. Thank you.